Stories of Enchantment by Jane Penser Myers. Chapter 3. The Little Ghost Who Laughed. Dolores sat beside Aunt Polly in the door of the cabin. The setting sun shone on her yellow curls, changing her into a veritable Goldilocks, peeped into her blue eyes until she was obliged to shut them. It shone on Aunt Polly's black face, causing it to glisten like black satin, and on her clean calico dress and white apron, for this was Sunday evening, and she was resting from her labors. Across the fields, its light was reflected from the roof and chimneys of the house, as Aunt Polly called it, for there she had lived as a slave before the war, and to her it was the only house of importance in the neighborhood. Dolores watched the sun climb from the roof and chimneys to the gilded points of the lightning rods, turning them to flashing spear points. Then it was gone, and she breathed a sigh. Aunt Polly heard it. "What's the matter, honey girl?" "I'm lonesome, Aunt Polly. Won't you tell me about the little ghost girl up at the house?" "No, sugar, I have to be away from home all day tomorrow, and you'll be here alone. That story will make you feel scary." "I won't be afraid. Besides, I'll go to school, maybe." "Bless your heart now, will you? Well, I'll tell you then, 'cause you're gonna be so good. Well, honey, when I was a young girl, I lived up at the house. That was before the war. I was one of the house servants, sort of waiting maid, and table maid too. Well, one stormy night, I was in the dining room, setting the dinner table. The rain and sleet was banging against the windows, and it was growing mighty dark. I thought I'd go out and shut the shutters. I thought I'd run out the front door, and close the parlor shutters too. The lamp wasn't lit in the hall yet, and as I went through, it seemed to me I saw something white curled up on the lower stair. I opened the front door so that I could see better what it was, and then I turned and went to it, and there, cuddled all up in a heap, was a strange little girl. She had a little peaked white face and great blue eyes, and her hair was about the color of yours. She had on a little white dress and had something in her hands, looked like a man's cap, and it was all torn and bloody, and there was blood on her dress. "My land, honey, where you come from?" I says, and she huddled down closer than ever and begun to cry just like her heart was most broke. I stooped down to pick her up in my arms. Aunt Polly's voice sank to a whisper, and she wasn't there. I rubbed my eyes and looked again, then I run to the door and looked out, but there wasn't nobody about. Then I got so scared I banged the door shut and run whooping and screaming to the kitchen. Aunt Susan, the cook, grabbed me by the arm. "Shut your head, girl, and tell me what's the matter," she said. So I done told her all about it, and she just dropped it all in a heap, and she said, "Oh my dear Lord, the judgment ain't coming again. Tell me, gal, was that baby laughing or crying?" And I said, "Crying." And she says, "Oh, my poor mistress." And I say, "Oh, Aunt Susan, what is it?" She said, "Gal, you done see a ghost. That's no baptized baby. That's a poor child that was murdered years and years ago by some wicked limb of this family for to get its money. Whenever that child comes here a weeping and a moaning, that's the sign of a death. If it comes laughing, then it brings good luck to we else." Well, I was that scared to think I'd done see a ghost that I shook all over, and couldn't wait on the table. Well, honey, I kept waiting for death or something as bad. And about a week later, my master's oldest boy was out hunting, and the gun went off too soon and blew the top of his head plumb off. They brought his torn and bloody cap home. I'd seen it before. After that, I was always watching for that ghost child, but I never seen her no more. But she came after that, for my old master died, and there was other troubles. Finally, after the war, my old mistress moved to the city with young Mr. Tom, and left the house in the care of the overseer of the plantation. Once a year, Mr. Tom comes down and stays a week or so, looking after things. He used to bring a lot of company with him, but since old Miss died, he sobered down. Don't seem to call for company no more. And now, sugar, you come go to bed, so that you can get up early and go to school. Aunt Polly, tell me first, do please tell me, where did you get me? Aunt Polly looked at her doubtfully. I don't know as you need to know, but your mama was a lady and your pa a gentleman. You come of good stock. Sometime I'll tell you, but not now, so you go to sleep. The next morning Aunt Polly was up and away early. She left a dainty breakfast spread out for Dolores, and a little tin pail packed with a lunch for her school dinner. Dolores wakened later and lay debating the question of going to school. It is needless to say that Aunt Polly, with her lax government and her fondness for the child, was spoiling her completely. Dolores was a law unto herself, and came and went as she pleased. She was looked down upon by the girls at school because she lived with Aunt Polly. She did not tell this to her, for she knew she would resent it bitterly, so she avoided them as much as possible, and many hours when Aunt Polly supposed that she was at school, she was wandering in the woods and fields. She thought of her half-promise given the night before in exchange for the ghost story, and resolved that she would go. My mother was a lady, and my father a gentleman. Then why need I care for those white trash? Aunt Polly is better than they are. I reckon I'd better go. And I'll go past the house and peek in at the hall where Aunt Polly saw the ghost. So she hurriedly put away her breakfast dishes, tidied up her room, locked the door, hid the key, and started on her way to school. She crossed the field and came to the old house by a path through a grove of old trees. This side of the house was never used. The shutters were closed, and the trees grew so close to the house that their great branches scraped against the walls, causing a creaking, groaning noise when the wind blew that had frightened the timid colored people away from the neighborhood. Dolores put down her pail and books. She sat down a moment to rest in the shade, for the sun was hot. The resting spell was the undoing of her good resolutions. For, glancing above her, she discovered a squirrel watching her, who began to chatter as soon as he knew that she had seen him. "Oh, you pretty dear, come down and I'll feed you," she said. And then she thought, I wonder if he has a nest up there. I'm going to find out. And soon she was among the lower branches of the tree, steadily working her way to the top. The squirrel turned with a jerk and a squeak, and disappeared through an open window that the branches had concealed from below. Dolores, following, found that one shutter was gone, and the wind, during some storm, had forced in the sash, while a limb had grown in through the window. She pushed her way and passed the limb in spite of the squirrel's remonstrance, and found herself in a large attic, which extended over the entire unused wing of the house. The squirrel scampered up the side of the window casing, and sat scolding her from above. The attic was filled with a rich treasure trove for Dolores. There were old spinning wheels, broken chairs, an empty cradle, a great old four-poster bed, and a number of trunks and boxes to rummage in. That was as far as she could see in the gloom, but no doubt beyond her range of vision were more delights. What a lovely place in which to play! The cradle for her dolls, an old clock to take to pieces, and dozens of old garments to dress up in. Several wonderfully queer old bonnets hung against the wall. She put on one, after shaking off the layer of dust with which it was coated, and glanced in a broken mirror to see the effect. Her merry laugh echoed through the attic as she beheld her face framed by the bonnet. And then she heard a sharp exclamation from the room beneath her, the scurrying of feet and the slamming of a door. Crouching behind the cradle, she waited developments, but no one came, so in a little while she grew bold again. I think I won't go to school after all. I reckon it's too late anyway. I'll stay here today. But first I must go back and get my dinner pail and books. I can study up here just as well as at school. And soon, Dolores, watched by the protesting squirrel, had slid down the tree, secured her books and dinner pail in her apron, and was back again. And then began her delightful, if naughty, day. She wound up the clock, polished the broken mirror, pulled the lighter articles of furniture here and there, tried the spinning wheel, and finally settled down to the delightful task of exploring the boxes and chests. In the meantime, down below in the kitchen of the old house, an excited group of colored people were talking. Aunt Polly was the center of the group, and was relating, for the benefit of a newcomer, her experience. I tell you, I done heard that ghost child again. No, I didn't see it, but I heard it. I went over to the north wing to put away that ar scene, and Mr. Jones told me to do. And while I was in that dark, lonesome bedroom above the parlor, I heard a child laugh just as clear and sweet as a bird. It sounded just right beside me. Oh, I was so scared, I run and banged the door after me. You don't catch this child going in that part of the house no more. Aunt Polly, asked one breathless listener, wasn't that the room where the murder was committed? Yes, yes, indeedy. The poor child was strangled in its sleep. Just then the voice of Mr. Jones was heard. Here, hurry up in there. Got too much to do to stand here gabbling. You know Mr. Tom comes tonight. He wants his place to be shining. And each one hurried off to her work. Aunt Polly, with a toss of her head and a sniff, proceeded leisurely to hang out the white curtains and bed linen she was doing up against the arrival of her beloved Mr. Tom. Dolores ate her dinner when she became hungry, gave some of it to the squirrel, and played on until the shadows in the attic indicated that evening was coming. Then she scrambled down and ran for home. She had time to brush the dust from her clothes, wash her face and hands, and lie down on the bed and fall asleep before Aunt Polly returned. By the time supper was ready and Dolores awakened, Aunt Polly had forgotten to ask about the school, in her eagerness to tell the important news that Mr. Tom was coming, and that she had heard the little ghost girl's laugh. And in a little while, Dolores again had forgotten everything in the dreamless sleep which comes to tired children, whether they are good or bad. She awoke in the morning to find Aunt Polly already gone. Not long after, the little truant followed, and, climbing her sylvan stairway, was soon in the delightful attic. She had explored all but one chest that was perched under the eaves. The other chest had yielded up a rich treasure, but she was curious to know what they all contained before she enjoyed the contents. So the little box was pushed close to the window, for it was growing dark in the attic. Dolores could hear the rumble of thunder, and the rain was beginning to patter on the shingles. She was not the least afraid of a storm, and proceeded leisurely with her task. The little chest was locked, but the key hung obligingly tied to one of the handles by a string. She unlocked it and raised the lid. Who can say what loving, breaking heart looked last into that little box? For, carefully folded away, with dead roses in each dainty garment, was a little girl's wardrobe, complete. The finest linen undergarments, trimmed with delicate laces, little white silk clocked stockings, little heelless slippers of blue and red kid, all faded and spotted with age and mold, the loveliest little lace-trimmed dresses, with short waist, puffed sleeves, and long skirts. Dolores hesitated a moment before examining them. On top of them was placed a note in a woman's hand. She laid it inside and did not read it until she had finished the examination. She opened it at last and read, "This is the wardrobe of my dear little dead daughter, Dolores." She closed the lid down gently, sprang up, and went to the window. "I must go home. I don't like this old attic. I've been a wicked girl to come here, but how did that little dead girl come to have my name?" She started to climb through the window and saw that it was raining very hard, a steady downpour that promised to last all day. She returned to the chest, laid the note carefully aside, and again lifted and unfolded each garment. How beautiful they were! Time had given them the delicate, mellow tint of old ivory. Dolores dearly enjoyed pretty clothes, and had possessed but few in her short life. She was charmed by their dainty quaintness. "They look like they just fit me. I'm going to try on a suit. The lady would not care. I'll be very careful of them." So on went the pretty underclothing, the white silk stockings and little heelless slippers. Then over her head she slipped a little white dress, hem-stitched and hand-embroidered. Her hair, which Aunt Polly kept tightly braided, was loosened in soft waves around her face and neck. The broken mirror revealed a little maid of the beginning of the 19th century. Such a charming little maid that Dolores was delighted with the vision. "My, but she's sweet. Little Dolores, do you like coming back to life?" And then her busy brain recalled the story of the little ghost girl. "I have a great mind to go downstairs. If anyone sees me, I can run back." She looked questioningly at the little figure in the glass. "Dolores, shall I go?" "You tell me, for I'm new today." The little shadow nodded. "Very well, then I will." She went to a door she had noticed, tried it, found it unlocked, and ventured out. A flight of stairs led down into a narrow corridor, flanked on each side by closed doors, and this led into the main hall. She stole shyly out into this, and proceeded towards the great stairway, but to reach it, she had to pass an open door. Someone was moving leisurely about the room. She peeped in and saw a young colored man unpacking his master's clothes. He had carefully arranged the toilet articles on the dressing case, and was trying one of the silver-backed brushes on his curly locks, with an unlit cigar between his teeth, evidently extracted from a full box on the dressing case. Dolores swung the door slowly open, and the man, seeing its reflection in the mirror, turned and confronted her in her quaint dress, standing in the soft gloom of the hall. She was pointing a threatening finger at the stolen cigar, frowning and biting her lip to keep from laughing, as she saw the horrified look on his face. Evidently, he had heard of the little ghost. The cigar fell from his lips, and his knees knocked together. He was too frightened to speak. When Dolores could control her face no longer, she turned and ran back to the attic. The colored man fled to the kitchen, declaring that he had seen the ghost, and if that masked Tom didn't go back to the city, he would, for he wasn't going to stay in no old house full of ghosts. Aunt Polly met her Mr. Tom on his return from hunting at the door, and told him the marvelous tale. "Wait till I change my clothes, Aunt Polly, and then come to the little library. If there's a fire there, for I'm chilly. I'll hear about it then." And he hurried upstairs. In the meantime, naughty Dolores had tired of the attic, and, having enjoyed her first adventure, had sailed forth to meet others. Not encountering anyone, she ventured down the wide stairs, peeped into numerous rooms, and opened a door into a very cozy room. Small and snug, with a fire burning on the hearth, she drew a big cushioned chair in front of it, sat down to watch it, and fell asleep. About an hour later, Aunt Polly was met in the hall by Mr. Tom, who looked very much surprised. "Come to the library, quick, Auntie. I've found the little ghost," he whispered. Aunt Polly followed, her knees trembling beneath her. Seeing the little figure in the chair, she started for the door, but thought better of it and ventured nearer. Getting a good look at the ghost, she saw it was Dolores, and sank limply down by her on her knees. "Well, well, well, I declare for it, it's the hand of the Lord," she whispered. "Who is she, Aunt Polly, and where'd she come from?" "She belongs to this family, Mr. Tom, and I'll tell you by and by where she comes from. But where she got them clothes, or how she got in here, is more than I can tell you." Just then Dolores stirred in her sleep, opened her eyes, and seeing them watching her, jumped to her feet. "Is this Mr. Tom? I'm the little ghost girl, and I bring you good fortune." And she looked up into his face and laughed. Aunt Polly grunted. "You need a good lambasting for scaring me so," she said wrathfully. Not long after, Dolores and Aunt Polly went to live with Mr. Tom. A wrong was righted, and the little ghost girl walked no more. End of Chapter 3.